どうもこんにちは、バッキーです。9月7日ですね。でもちょっと明日朝起きるの早いので一文だけ読みたいと思います。Trade Finance Collateral Damage, the world's most complicated paper chase is stumbling into the digital era. はい、stumbling。オツです。9月8日読んでいきたいと思います。はい。Collateral damage, trade finance, the world's most complicated paper chase is stumbling into the digital era. In one where fewer people wear socks, says Paul Rothstein of Gold.Medial International, a wholesaler in New York. People may not sport socks in the summer, but his firm starts shipping them to retailers in July ahead of the start of the school year. There is, however, a big lag before he is paid.He normally uses trade credit insurance to protect against the risk that his invoices go unpaid. But this year, the insurers have slashed the amount they are willing to cover by 15 to 90%. That leaves him with two options: shoulder huge credit risk himself or walk away from orders. わからん。Mr. Rothstein's dilemma underscores the role underscore 9月8 underscore the role of trade finance 交換貿易金融ってこと？ Unglamorous but critical bit of the financial system.Many firms are owed a large amount by their customers in the form of receivables. In total, the amount is worth around 20% of global GDP. Some firms bear all the risk of non-payment themselves, but others look to an insurer to protect them from default.or take out specialist loans backed by the invoices. To get invoice 動詞かな？ By the invoices 名詞ね。Together, these financing solutions underpin 4/5 of cross-border transactions, which are worth $15 trillion a year. Trade financiers face three problems created by the COVID-19 pandemic and the accompanying recession. It has disrupted normal operations by slowing the travel of documents. It has raised the risk that the existing loan will soar, and it has made lenders more cautious about making new loans. Take operational trouble first. Trade finance is notoriously paper-based. Processing credit requires involved parties from financiers and carriers to warehouse managers and customs officers to exchange an average of 36 documents and 240 copies, but lockdown trapped bits of paper in shutdown office. Printing became a problem when couriers eventually got to bank. They often found no one there. Financiers have been forced to be nimble. Staff turned up to the bank of China's Wuhan office wearing full protective gear, banks started accepting scanned signatures and documents. A cargo firm executive says it issued 4 times as many electronic bills of lending receipts, detailing goods on board a ship in March as it did in February. That has helped limit delays, though some in the industry worry that rises and fraud could follow. A second concern is that the existing stock of credit turns sour. Tradeストック株信用株価ってことかなが上がってるってこと。Trade finance has long been super safe annual default rate on letters of credit averaged 0.11% of transactions in 2008 to 18, less than a tenth of those for corporate loans. But insurers already report payment delay. A rise in bankruptcies would make matters worse. Coface, a trade credit insurer, expects these to rise by a third worldwide by 2021, still because trade finance is short-term, usually 30 to 90 days, and backed by collateral lenders have some recourse. Natalie Booth of HSBC, a bank, reckons that the performance gap between trade finance assets and corporate loans will widen. The third problem is a possible crunch in new financing to assess clients. Banks and insurers rely on credit ratings. These have plummeted as firms' cash flow have dwindled. The resulting squeeze may linger, says Ebru Pak-Khan of Citigroup, a bank. Firms are downgraded quickly but upgraded slowly. Some lenders may focus on large clients or exit some markets entirely. In survey, have cut their exposure to the industry by 8 to 9%, about half as much as in 2008 to 9. In emerging countries, sovereign downgrades have also pulled down corporate ratings. Say Mark Aubin of the World Trade Organization. On July 1st, the WTO and 6 multilateral banks promised to alleviate trade finance shortage. Still, the damage could have been worse. Thankfully, banks have sturdier equity buffers than in the last recession since 2016. Coface has raised its solvency ratios, ensures equivalent of banks' capital adequacy buffers from 150% to 190%, says Kisibia Brown. Its both central bank action has shored up lenders' finances. Government in Europe have let export credit agencies cover short-term trade and have offered insurers backstops. The question is, how long the support lasts? Banks and insurers will see their capital eaten up as loans or government aid could be withdrawn too soon, worries Alexis Galati of Euler Hermes, a trade credit insurer. Support could be taken away just as the demand for finance returns as new orders work their way through supply chains. Exports appear to be bouncing back faster than manufacturing. Still, the pandemic could lead to lasting gains by forcing the industry to digitize. Alexander Gowlandley of S-Docs, which promotes paperless trade, says 16 chambers of commerce have opted for its electronic certificates of origin in recent months, compared with the usual rate of 10 a year. Some countries have also adopted laws recognizing the validity of e-document. Digital standard could make it easier to bundle trade finance loans into security that can be sold on to institutional investors, providing more oxygen to commerce. Trade finance has long followed automated practices. Now might be its chance to blow everyone's socks off. じゃあ今日はここまでにしましょうか。次です。どうもこんばんは、ラッキーです。9月9日やっていきたいと思います。Property in America, the house wins. Unfazed by the recession, the housing market remains buoyant. America's housing market is behaving oddly. Residential property, 住宅財産 worth $35 trillion, slightly more than America's stock market, seems strangely oblivious to the economic carnage around it. Housing market is behaving oddly. 住宅財産、土地の値段の話。House prices 土地の値段だね。In May were 4.3% higher than a year earlier. That rate of growth is only marginally below the average since the end of the housing crash a decade ago. Prices in even the costly asset prices, such as San Francisco, where the average pad set to you back $1.1 million, continue to march upwards. Many economists still expect housing prices to fall over the whole of 2020, but such forecasts are looking increasingly shaky. At first glance, this is surprising. House prices typically nosedive during recession. A rising number of mortgage defaults lead to more properties being put up for sale. Falling household incomes reduce buyers' purchasing power. In the recession of the early 1990s, house prices dropped by 10% in real terms. They fell by 3 times that in the downturn that followed the financial crisis of 2007-9, the fall in GDP associated with the coronavirus pandemic, and the rise in unemployment is unprecedented. Despite that, there is little sign so far that America's housing market is about to subside. Subside よく出てきますね。Subside. The rate of foreclosure looks unlikely to reach. Foreclosure ってなんだろうな。To reach the heights hit during the last recession. Housing debt relative to income is lower. The share of mortgages lent to borrowers with very low credit score is less sequence of tighter financial regulation. Meanwhile, fiscal help has come a lot faster than it did a decade ago. During the last crash, schemes to help homeowners did not arrive until millions of families had already seen loans foreclosed. Foreclosed って何やろうな。 This time the government stimulus package has made requesting up to a year's pause in mortgage payments easier. Homeowners can get this without having to do very much to prove they need it. All that cast a different light on the apparently alarming increase in the share of mortgage on payment holidays from practically zero just before the pandemic to close to 10% in May. Analysis at Capital Economics, a consultancy reckon that many requests for forbearance have been made by borrowers who are in fact able to keep up their mortgage payment, but are requesting assistance as an insurance policy. Cash handouts from the government have also been generous, so much so that, in stark contrast to the usual declines seen during recessions, America's aggregate household income is forecast to rise in 2020 by about as much as it did in 2019. That will help borrowers keep up with their mortgage payment. Indeed, a fifth of Americans receiving a stimulus check from the federal government have put it towards their mortgage. Looser monetary policy has also helped. Since the beginning of the year, the interest rate on 30-year mortgage has fallen by about half a percentage point to an all-time low of just over 3%. Mortgage companies are overrun with applications from people seeking to refinance. House hunters, including those seeking to escape city centers after the pandemic, can now afford more expensive properties. As lockdown was lifted, pent-up demand for housing led to a 20% year-on-year rise in mortgage applications in June. What happens to the housing market next depends on the evolution of the COVID-19 outbreak and, in turn, that of the overall economy. Yet, when the fog does eventually clear, a period of even stronger price growth might not be a surprise. A raft of academic evidence draws a strong link between loose monetary policy and the bubbly housing market. As a researcher noted before the pandemic, that the supply of new housing in America was failing to keep up with demand, owing in part to increasing complex land regulations and reduced competition in house buildings. Social distancing requirements are also likely to hold construction back in the coming months. With supply constrained and demand boosted, house prices seem to rest on solid foundation. じゃあ今日はここまでにします。お疲れ様です。はい、じゃあやっていきましょう。9月10日です。Bottom wood zero gravity. Why near zero interest rate might lead to a more volatile currency market.A generation of English cricket fans know the Ashes are lost to surrender a lead for much of the past 2 decades. Australia has been a high interest rate economy. 金利が高かったのね。ってことかな。But not anymore. In March, the Reserve Bank of Australia cut its benchmark cash rate to 0.25%. That is the lowest interest rate have ever gone, and as low as they are likely to go. to signal its intentions that rate will stay put. 9月10日。Stay put. The RBA, Reserve Bank of Australia, has pledged to fix 3-year bond yields at 0.25%. The Australian case is telling near zero interest rates are the norm in rich countries. Very low interest rates are common elsewhere too. Indeed, among the more prosperous sort of emerging markets, also Indonesia, Mexico, Russia, and the inflation-prone Turkey have short-term interest rates above 4%. Rock bottom rates have gone global to a much greater extent than after the financial crisis of 2007-9. And a lot of central banks, like the RBA, are committing themselves to keeping rates low. It is natural to think that if interest rates are glued to the effective lower bond, exchange rate will be similarly stuck. Be stuck. 停滞するってこと？ An axiom of foreign exchange analysis is that shift in policy rate or in expectations of policy rates drive currencies up and down, yet a zero-rate world might plausibly imply more currency volatility. There is little scope for interest rate to adjust to economic trouble. So something else must. The exchange rate is the likeliest candidate. To understand why, start with the idea that trade and capital flows are mirror image. Say a country runs a current account deficit worth $10 billion each year. To fund this, it borrows $10 billion from abroad. The higher its short-term interest rate compared with other countries, the more it attracts such funds. But short-term borrowing is not the only way for a currency to finance a current account deficit. It could instead sell some of its asset property, offshore, say, or even whole businesses to foreigners. It is useful to think of the exchange rate as the shadow price of these assets. The currency finds a level that keeps the current and capital accounts in balance. Now put our hypothetical country in a zero interest rate world. Assume it exports a split between raw materials and manufacturing goods. And imagine an economic shock that lowers the demand for commodities. Our country's exchange rate would fall, helping boost demand for its manufacturers. Were interest rate positive, the central bank could cut them to fire up domestic spending and make up for the shortfall of raw material export. But at zero interest rate, this is not possible. The consequence is that the exchange rate will need to do more of the work of gimping up an economy. Gimping up an economy, notes Steve Enlander of Standard Chartered Bank, a plausible outcome of widespread low rates. Then is currency volatility. If the exchange rate is the only game in town, the more closed your economy is, the more it has to fall. In a more open economy, the currency would fall less. What else might attenuate currency volatility? Fiscal policy might seem an obvious influence. The more a government spends in response to a shock, the less stimulus is needed. by other means, including by currency depreciation, rich countries have more fiscal space than they ever imagined. Circuit jerks of society generally a bank, but they must employ it in a way that is useful. Getting the timing and effectiveness of fiscal stimulus right is tricky. An ill-judged or ill-disciplined fiscal stimulus would be a poor substitute for an interest rate cut. Fiscal policy might then add to currency volatility, not detract from it, which brings us back to capital flows. A key influence on currency volatility is the attractiveness or otherwise of a country's asset market. The broader the range of assets on offer and the easier they are to buy or sell, the less the currency needs to fall to entice foreign buyers. Conversely, the tighter a country's restriction on cross-border asset sales, the more volatile its currency is likely to be. Put simply, if you lack the sort of asset and growth story that foreigners can buy into, your currency is at more risk in a zero-rate world. The lesson is that fixing a policy rate does not mean the capital and trade flows are set in stone. If central bank rates cannot adjust to changing economic circumstances, then something else must. So do not be surprised if the new era of globalized zero interest rate policy leads to the current instability. むずいっすね。ちょっとずつ英語分かってきたけどな。はい、お疲れ様です。9月11日も一文だけ読めます。Fully extend your Latin American tragedy. The region's latest economic woes fit a long-standing pattern of underperformance. はい、ありがとうございます。はい、9月13日やっていきたいと思います。The region's latest economic woes 9月13 woes fit a long-standing pattern of underperformance, where COVID-19 strikes. Its level had thrust in recent weeks. Latin America has become the center of the pandemic, responsible for over half of daily deaths. The region's acute health crisis is accompanied by an economic decline unveiled in the developing world. The IMF forecast that output in the region will shrink by 9.4% in 2020, more than 3 times the contraction of 3% projected for emerging economies as a whole. The economic and social devastation wreaked by the pandemic is all the more painful for coming on the heels of 2 underwhelming decades. Investors had waxed enthusiastic about Latin America's prospects during the great emerging market boom of the 2000s, and the 2010s, only to be disappointed. The few gains that were made seem almost certain to be resolved. The economies of Latin America are far from homogeneous. Many share characteristics, however, that have conspired to make the region among the hardest hit in the world. In some places, lockdowns have been stringent. 厳しいみたいな感じかな。Peru, for example, took the extraordinary step of closing its mines, the foundation of its economy. contributing to the IMF's claim forecast of a decline in output of 40% this year, but big and dense cities with a high rate of poverty and substantial segment of the population in informal work have limited the effectiveness of lockdowns. The large informal sector, together with weak state capacity, has also undermined the reach of government relief and exacerbated the economic collapse. Populist blowhards with little time for expert govern the region's biggest economies, compounding its problems. The breakness of 2020 Latin America also owes much to the condition of its economies before the coronavirus spread. Many limped into the new decade. Growth across the continent, even excluding Venezuela, whose economy collapsed catastrophically in recent years, was just 1.8% in 2018 and 0.8% in 2019. By the start of this year, Argentina and Mexico were already in recession. Many other countries were stagnating, including Brazil, which enjoyed only the briefest of respites. Respite after a serious political and economic crisis in 2015 and 2016. These would fit a longer-running pattern of Latin America falling behind. The turn of the millennium marked the start of great surge in the fortune of the emerging world and the departure from the usual state of affairs in which poor countries only rarely caught up to rich world incomes in a sustained fashion. Trade grew explosively, commodity prices boomed, and the developing world asserted itself more confidently on the world stage. In the 2000s, real output per person across the emerging world on purchasing power parity basis rose at an astonishing clip of 4.6% per year, or 4 times the pace achieved by rich economies. The great gaps in income between advanced countries and the rest that opened during the 20th century seemed destined to narrow and close in the 21st. Latin America, however, proved a laggard. It managed an average growth rate in real per person incomes of just 1.9% in the 20s, faster than in rich economies but the lowest of the emerging world. In the 2010s, growth in the region ground to a near halt, at just 0.5% per year, behind both the emerging country average and the rich one. Latin America's relatively high incomes, its larger economies are nearly all middle income, may have contributed to slower growth. The richer you are, the less scope to grow by borrowing established technologies from other places. Its isolation mattered too. The fastest growing emerging economies of the era were industrializing countries in Europe and Asia, which could latch on to the manufacturing supply chains of advanced rivals. Few Latin American economies, apart from Mexico, enjoyed similar opportunities, and also the quality of governance and of macroeconomic policy in particular has improved markedly. Since the debt crisis and inflation of the 1980s and 1990s, corruption, crime, and violent politics have made Latin America a less hospitable place for investors than it might have been. じゃあ今日はここまでにします。お疲れ様です。9月14日やっていきたいと思います。はい。The countries of the future. Latin America has averted the debt crisis. Averted って何だっけな Averted debt crisis. So far, the Federal Reserve dollar swap line enjoy, while Mexico and Brazil have shielded them against troubles sparked by dollar shortage. IMF credit lines available to China, Colombia, Mexico, and Peru have eased the market pressure on the region. Central banks have been able to cut the interest rate to provide something of a cushion against the pandemic's economic damage. Cushion against. Still, there is no escaping the fact that even the healthiest of Latin America economies faces punishing road back to normality. The IMF forecast for growth in 2021 are decidedly tepid. GDP in the region is expected to expand by 3.7% next year, compared with 5.9% for the emerging world as a whole, unless the growth in COVID-19 infections fall rapidly. Even those May-Agri projections will prove too optimistic. The reduction in inequality and poverty that was achieved in the past 2 decades is now at risk. The World Bank warned that poverty in the region could rise by as much as 23 million. This year, government policy seems unlikely to alleviate these hardships. Mass protests erupted in Bolivia, China, Colombia, and Ecuador last year. Political system may be strained further. It matters, too, that Latin America's 3 largest economies are among its most troubled. Argentina has defaulted on its debt again and faces a risk of runaway inflation for America as the worst in the world. It may need help from the IMF to avoid a debt crisis or turn instead to inflationary finance. Mexico suffers from threat to the rule of law. A president seemingly determined to scale off private investment and an unpredictable northern neighbor, which is also its biggest export market. For Latin America, COVID-19 is a double shock, a brutally painful tragedy in its own right, and the definitive end of a growth opportunity that the region largely failed to exploit. The future of its economy is about ね。変換するやったかな。With unpredictable northern neighbor, which is also its biggest export market for Latin America, COVID-19 is a double shock, a brutal painful tragedy there, and the definitive end of a growth opportunity that the region largely failed to exploit. The future of its economies and its societies depends on whether Latin Americans can be persuaded that there will be other chances in the future and that next time its government will do more to seize them. A hydrogen power, another look in the toy box. After many false starts, hydrogen power bear fruit. Bear fruits って何なのかな？ A conventional wisdom holds that battery-powered cars are the future of motoring. But Hyundai, a big South Korean vehicle maker, is not so sure. Over the past few months, it has been running a worldwide public relations campaign exploring the bias of an alternative source of electrical power, fuel cells, instead of storing and then releasing electricity gathered from the mains in the way that a battery does. A fuel cell generates current from a chemical reaction between hydrogen and oxygen. The oxygen comes from the air. The hydrogen, suitably compressed, is stored in a tank on board the vehicle and is replenished at a filling station. Like petrol, unlike a battery, a fuel cell does create exhaust, but that exhaust is simply the reaction product of hydrogen and oxygen, namely water. Hyundai's campaign features members of BTS, a mop-topped South Korean boy band, starring Doria into the middle distance. Amid the backdrops of natural beauty, as a reminder of fuel cells' environmental advantages. Water is everywhere. It falls as snow. It rolls in ocean. It flows gently through forest as mist. Forest, writes Park Jimin, one of BTS's members, in a misguided quest for profundity. Our list comes from forest. The marketing may be silly, but Hyundai is serious. The firm already sells battery-powered vehicle, but it is heading its low-carbon bets by developing hydrogen one as well. The advertising campaign is designed to sell the next car, the firm's second fuel cell car, which was launched last year, and Hyundai is not the only company keeping its option open in this way. On June 5th, Toyota, maker of the Prius, the world's biggest selling battery hybrid vehicle, announced a joint venture with several Chinese car makers to develop fuel cell technology. An updated version of Toyota's Mirai on the hydrogen-powered car is due out late this year. Hydrogen is enjoying a purple patch down, and not just among car makers. It is being touted as a means of propelling buses and lorries and even ships and aircraft. There is talk of it replacing natural gas as a source of heat, of it being used to store the surplus output of solar and wind power stations, of it being employed as a chemical feedstock, and even of it replacing coke as a means of extracting metallic iron from its oil. If all this came to pass, then hydrogen would become a dominating factor in human life in the way the hydrocarbons currently are. It would, in other words, usher in a hydrogen economy. This time it's defined to honest. Leaders of a certain age are now permitted to roll their eyes. At least twice in the past 50 years, in the 1970s, after the oil crisis, and in the 1990s when climate change started to acquire political salience, there has been excited talk of replacing hydrocarbons with hydrogen. It didn't happen. お疲れ様です。サライです。こんばんは。9月15日やっていきたいと思います。There were several reasons for this. For a start, ripping up Ripping up and then replacing the world with fossil fuel infrastructure is a huge job, and even more that uneasy thing to accomplish. Hydrogen itself has drawback. Though better than batteries, it stores less energy in a given volume than fossil fuel can manage. See that. More important, it is not a primary fuel. You have to make it from something else. This can be done by a chemical reaction called steam reforming, but besides steam, the other ingredient of that process is a hydrocarbon of some sort, which rather defeats the object of the exercise, or it can be done by the electrolysis of water. This has appropriate credentials as long as the electricity is either from renewable source or a nuclear power plant. But the law of thermodynamics means that the energy content to the hydrogen which comes out of the process is less than the electricity that went to it. This inbuilt inefficiency raises the question, why not simply power the end user electrically rather than using hydrogen as an intermediary? To counter these arguments, those who believe that since hydrogen related really are different this time around can point to two things in their favor. Several of the relevant technologies, notably electrolytic equipment, are now at the stage where it is possible to believe they might soon become cheap enough to do the job, and the idea that economies need to be decarbonized fully in order to curb climate change is gathering speed. Until 2019, for instance, Britain had planned to cut carbon emissions by 80% from their levels in 1990 by 2050. It then, however, upped the ante to become the first big economic power to commit itself to a 100% cut. This has implications for hydrogen electrification using renewable sources such as wind and solar power would probably have got the country to 80%, observes David Joff, a member of the Committee on Climate Change (CCC), an organization that advises Britain's government on how to bring the transformation about. But for decarbonization, he said, is a much bigger task, and one for which hydrogen may prove necessary. Finding a niche. Despite Hyundai's and Toyota's enthusiasm, fuel analysts believe cars will be part of this process. The CCC calculates that a battery-powered car charged with electricity from a wind turbine converts 86% of the turbine's output into forward motion on the road. For a fuel cell car, it is 40 to 45. Hydrogen cars also suffer from chicken and egg problem. Unlike the battery-powered variety, they cannot be refueled at home, yet roadside refueling stations for them are scarce and are likely to remain so while the cars themselves remain rare. In the meantime, battery cars are building a formidable lead. The International Energy Agency, which advises national government, reckons there were just 11,200 hydrogen-powered cars on the road in 2080, mostly in America and Japan. That compared with 5.1 million battery-powered cars, and this number is growing fast. In 2090, sales of new battery-powered cars in China, the world's biggest automobile market, hit 1.2 million to 4.7% of the total. In a way, they accounted for more than half of new cars sold. According to the IEA, sales of hydrogen cars around the world in 2080, the most recent year for which reliable figures are available, was just 4,000. There is, though, more to transport than private cars. A big problem with batteries is that they have a low energy density. In other words, they have to take up a lot of space if they are to propel a vehicle for any distance. For private cars, which mostly make short journeys, that is manageable. For longer distance travel, for example, by lorries, say Mark Newman, an energy analysis at Bernstein, a bank, hydrogen's greater energy density becomes more attractive. Hydrogen compressed to 7,000 atmosphere contains between 2 and 5 times more usable energy per liter than a lithium-ion battery. If it is liquefied, which requires more complex technology, that increases further, and since lorries spend most of their time on basic land roads, new fueling stations would be needed. Exactly where the break-even point lies is still debated. Tesla, a pioneering electric car maker, thinks that even lorries can usefully be powered by batteries and plants. A version that can travel 800 km. Hyundai already makes a hydrogen-powered lorry, but its range is only 400 km. Several other firms are also investigating fuel cells for lorries. In April, for example, the Daimler, a German company, and Volvo, a Swedish one, invested 1.2 billion euro かな in a joint venture to pursue the idea. 今日はここまでにします。お疲れ様です。こんばんは。9月16日いきます。眠て sleeping which accounts for around 2.5% of the world industrial greenhouse gas emissions. Is also taking an interest. The International Maritime Organization, an appendage of the United Nations that regulates the industry, aspire to cut ship collective greenhouse gas emissions to half their level in 2008 by 2050. How this might be achieved is unclear. Batteries pack far too little energy to power big ocean-going vessels. Engineers have toyed with everything. From nuclear propulsion to to high-tech sales. But a study published in March by the International Council on Clean Transportation, an American not-for-profit institution, examined an existing shipping route between China and America and concluded that virtually all the craft fleeing it. It could be powered by fuel cells, like those used in Hyundai's car, albeit with some cargo space removed to make room for the hydrogen itself. Even that could be ameliorated, says Michael Liberty, an energy consultant, by first reacting the hydrogen with nitrogen to produce ammonia, a chemical that takes up less room than elemental hydrogen, and which can also be used in fuel cells. Hot stuff. Hydrogen might replace natural gas for heating as well. A big advantage here is that it could make use of current infrastructure in the form of pipelines now employed to transport that natural gas. Several countries, including Australia, Britain, and Germany, are experimenting with this idea. We already have a gas grid that should last for at least another 75 years, says Anthony Green, an engineer at National Grid, which runs Britain's electricity and gas networks. Why not make use of that if we can? National Grid recounts that gas-fired boilers, which heat most British homes, can cope with a mix of 20% hydrogen without modification, and says Dr. Green, boiler makers are beginning to offer hydrogen-ready models which are capable of burning either natural gas or pure hydrogen. Since boilers are replaced even 10 to 15 years, he reckons that gas grid could plausibly plausibly be ready to switch to hydrogen in a couple of decades' time. In May, a group of German pipeline operators unveiled a plan to build a 1,200 kilometers hydrogen grid based on convert natural gas pipes by 2013 at the cost of $660 million. How much environmental good this would truly do is debated, starting from the position that the only green alternative for heating is electricity powered by renewable Graham-Cooled both of ITM Pro. A hydrogen equipment maker points out that Britain's natural gas grid supplies every year around 880 TWh ワットかな of energy to home, factories and office, most of which is used for heating. That is more than twice as much energy as the country's electricity grid carries. A switch to renewable powered electric heating would therefore require a drastic and expensive beefing up of the electricity network. Dr. Joffe, however, counters that the need to manufacture hydrogen in the first place with all the inefficiencies inefficiencies. This means a hydrogen gas grid would require building even more new power stations than would heating homes or factories with electricity directly. Another suggested role for hydrogen is large-scale energy storage. As wind and solar power spread, matching supply with demand becomes harder. An obvious solution is to store surplus in good times for use later when times are bad. And one way to do that might be to make hydrogen and keep it in underground caverns, as currently happened with natural gas. This could increase capacity enormously, perhaps enough to manage not just day-to-day fluctuations, but in interseasonal ones as well. On top of these ideas, heavy industry may provide other niches for hydrogen to fill, says Dr. Liebel Leahy. Electric heating may struggle to replace natural gas for many industrial processes involving steel, ceramics, and glass because it might not be able to reach the required temperature. And one of the biggest industrial sources of carbon dioxide is not directly an energy related at all. This is the reduction of iron ore, usually an oxide of iron, to the metal itself by reacting the oil with carbon monoxide made from coke that produce iron. Carbon dioxide react the oil with hydrogen instead, and the waste product is water. Several firms, including ArcelorMittal, a multinational steel maker, and a conglomerate of SSAB, a Finnish Swedish steel maker, LKAB, a Swedish iron ore producer, and Swedish are examining this possibility. はい、お疲れ様です。眠たい。はい、こんばんは。9月17日読んでいきます。Elemental economics. All of this does, however, depend on an ability to make hydrogen at the scale in a way that does not release CO2 into the atmosphere, and that is tricky. At that moment, virtually all of the roughly 70 million tons of hydrogen produced each year is a result of steam reforming. This emits 7 tons of carbon dioxide for every ton of hydrogen yield. For this reason, steam reformed hydrogen is known to environmentalists as gray hydrogen. Its cost varies according to local circumstances, but average according to the IEA around $1.50 a kilogram. Blue hydrogen, though still the result of steam reforming, is somewhat cleaner than the gray variety. Instead of the CO2 being dumped into the air, it is captured and buried underground, so-called carbon capture and storage. This is starting to happen on July 1st. For example, Equinor, Norwegian energy firm said it would build one of the world's biggest blue hydrogen plants. At a site in northern England, more ambitiously, Japan hopes that blue hydrogen might power its future. It envisages creating the gas from lignite deposit in Australia burning the carbon dioxide locally and then shipping the hydrogen across the Pacific in tankers akin to those that now carry liquefied natural gas. The extra equipment needed to capture the carbon dioxide produced by reforming necessarily pushes up the price of blue hydrogen. Bloomberg New Energy Finance, a firm of clean energy analysts, reckon its current cost ranges from $1.50 to $3.50 a kilogram, depending on which fossil fuel is used to produce it. Moreover, the process of capturing CO2 is imperfect, so some of that gas escapes the real desideratum. Therefore, is green electrolytic hydrogen at $2.50, $5.50 to $5 or more a kilogram. However, green hydrogen is currently even pricier than the blue salt. This could all change though, as the technologies involved in making both blue and green hydrogen are scaled up. Prediction is a max game, but BNEF has had a go anyway. Its analysis reckons green hydrogen might, by 2050, cost between 70 cents and $1.6 a kilogram. In other words, the current price of the green variety, as covered Varunaguri, the firm's head of special project, explained the cost of electrolysis equipment has fallen by around 40% in the last 5 years in the West. Dr. Varunaguri reckons the kit can now be had in Western countries for around $1,200 per kilowatt of capacity, and that there may be scope for those numbers to fall much further. The cost in the Chinese market is drastically lower, around $200 per kilowatt, he says, which will presumably bring the price down everywhere soon. UBS, a bank, cites a deal recently struck by Nikola, an American firm that says it is planning to make hydrogen lollies, which implies electrolysis cost of just $350 per kilowatt. Operating cost, meanwhile, can ride on one of the most striking and reliable trends in the energy industry, the relentless fall in the price of solar and wind power. The cost of solar in particular has fallen by 85% in the past decade. Renewables are now cheaper in some parts of the world than energy from fossil fuel, and the process shows no sign of slowing. It's a gas. The economics then seem to be pointing in the right direction for hydrogen to become, if not dominant, then at least an important part of the mix. The hydrogen concealed, a lobby group based on blue cells, think the gas could be satisfying 80% of the world's energy demand by 2050. The share prices of firms that make fuel cells, electrolysis equipment, and the like have consequently been marching upward. Many of the assumptions made in various forecasts rely, however, on government providing prodigious subsidies. to develop the technology. BNEF says subsidies of around $150 billion over the next 10 years might be needed to make hydrogen competitive in reality. The IEA reckons that total government spending on hydrogen in 2018 was just $724 million. Offshore interest is certainly picking up though. On June 10th, Germany announced a €7 billion subsidy program aimed at making it the world leader in the technology. A leaked draft of the European Union's post-COVID stimulus plan contains an ambition to install 40 gigawatts of green hydrogen capacity by 2030. China's government hopes to see 1 million fuel cell-powered vehicles on the road by the same year. Japan, long a fan of hydrogen, wants its price to fall by 90% by 2050. As to retooling vast swatches of global energy. Swatches of global energy system to accommodate this change. Dr. Banagli calculated that replacing natural gas with hydrogen would mean tripling or quadrupling the world's gas storage infrastructure at a cost of perhaps $600 billion. In the end, hydrogen's impact will be limited by the basic fact that it is ultimately just electricity in disguise. It remains an inescapably inefficient option for some applications though. Its advantages, its energy density, its ability to burn, and its compatibility with existing infrastructure could make it an alternative fit despite that drawback. To paraphrase another famous advert. The hopes is that hydrogen might prove to be the Heineken of clean energy, able to replace the part of an economy that electrification cannot do. あっち、はい、お疲れ様です。9月19日、一文だけ読んでいきます。フィロキセラかな The root of the problem. The past genome reveals its past and shines light on how to deal with it in the future. はい、ありがとうございます。